Greetings, everyone, and welcome to God Save the King. I am your host, Tim Kies. I want to thank you for joining me on the Truth Be Told radio network, where you can hear my show every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, let's handle a little bit of business right up front. We are in the holiday season. As I am taping this right now, recording this right now, it is Wednesday, December 4th, and it will be broadcast at my regular time on Wednesday, December 6th. Now, because my show is God Save the King. God Save the King is all about the nativity. Well, then this is the time of year when we have great conversations, about the nativity, about the birth of Jesus Christ, and quote unquote about Christmas. Air quotes there for those of you that aren't watching on video. Even though we know that Jesus was not born on Christmas, and we'll get more into that in just a minute. But the business right here, just to let you know, is that on the Truth Be Told radio network, we have a practice that we engage in every year, which is that we play quote unquote Christmas music on Christmas Day. And usually we start like the night before at midnight, play it for 24 hours in a row, something like that. Pardon me. This year, we're going to begin the Christmas music at 12 noon on Christmas Eve and then run the Christmas music for 36 hours straight. So if you enjoy the Truth Be Told radio network and you tune in on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, you will get Christmas music. Okay. Now that's interesting for me and my show, like I said, because if you have not heard my show before, like I said, my name is Tim Kies. I am the host of a show called God Save the King. And what is God Save the King? Well, God Save the King, very simply, is a discussion of the nativity, of the birth of Christ. And for me, this is nearly a 40-year research project. In the mid-1980s, I was introduced to the hypothesis that Jesus was not born on December 25th. It got my attention, and I dove, pardon me, guys. Okay, I'm back. Hopefully I can talk. I am still suffering from the remnant of a respiratory affliction that has been badgering me for weeks on end here. So unfortunately, every once in a while, it decides to jump in there and hit me with a coughing fit, and there's not a whole lot I can do to stop it. So hopefully that won't happen very much here. But if I do, I may mute the channel for a second. So if you're listening on radio, just hang tight for a second and hopefully I'll be back. I mean, those of you that are watching on video, you'll be able to see, I'll clearly be coughing, and then I'll be back in a second. So sorry about the technical difficulties here, getting over a respiratory thing that's been bothering me for quite some time. So anyway, like I said, this is God Save the King, where we talk about the nativity. That's the point. We talk about the nativity. And like I said, this is a particularly good time of year to talk about the nativity, because this is the time of year we associate with the nativity, even if that happens to be incorrect, which it is. Okay. So for the benefit of those who may have not heard my show before, if you're tuning in for the first time, or if you're following, or if you're listening to this on a podcast, or if you happen to be checking us out on Rumble or YouTube and you have tripped over my show and you have found this video, maybe you haven't heard me before. So let's cover some basics here real quick. Number one, Jesus was not born on December 25th. Sorry, no, not possible. Didn't happen. Okay. Because number one, there is no explicit date of his birth given in the Bible. We are not told Jesus was born on XYZ. We're not told explicitly. Okay. We may be told cryptically when he was born, but not explicitly. And there's a big difference between the two. Therefore, if the exact date of his birth is discoverable, then it must be pieced together by following the evidence. You have no choice. You must start with a blank slate and say, okay, we have this piece of evidence here, this one here, this one here, this one here, this one here, and we build our argument brick by brick, and then we follow where the evidence goes. Okay, that is how you're going to discover when Jesus was born. The way you're not going to discover when Jesus was born is by following the tradition and claiming that somehow the tradition has validity when it has absolutely none. Okay, there is no evidence that supports a December 25th birthday. There's some tradition that supports it, but tradition is not evidence. That would never stand up in a court of law. It should never stand up in academia. Sorry, guys, Jesus was not born on December 25th. And when I say that, I'm not saying that to ruin your holiday. I'm really not. I'm doing this because the real story of when Jesus was born, because when he was born changes the story. That's the other thing. The real story of when Jesus was born is amazing. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how it is no accident. It is no accident that Jesus was born during the reign of Augustus Caesar. Okay? You know, our God is sovereign, the God of the Bible. He knows the end from the beginning. So he knew from before the foundation of the world that he was going to bring his son into the world quietly in a little village called Bethlehem during the reign of the first emperor of the Roman Empire, one of the most powerful empires ever in the history of the world, and certainly the most powerful at that day and time. Okay, it's not an accident. And the contrast between the Roman Empire over here and the birth of the King of the universe, the second person of the Godhead, God incarnate, coming into his humanity like I said, in a little town, in a little village of 500 people called Bethlehem, right, is just absolutely stunning. So anyway, not born on December 25th. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, tradition is not evidence. It doesn't count. It doesn't count for a single solitary thing. And when you start looking at the evidence that comes from the Bible, none of it leads you towards December 25th. Okay? None of it does. It just doesn't take you there. It takes you in another direction entirely. Okay? Now, here's a huge, big, important part, and it plays a huge role in what we're going to talk about today, which is the traditional version of the nativity story is rarely told in its historical context. Okay? And this is far more important than most people realize. Historical context means everything when interpreting historical evidence. Now, that sounds redundant, but it's not. Okay, historical context means everything when you're interpreting historical evidence. And frankly, if you're not studying biblical history, you're not studying the Bible, or at least you're not studying it properly. Because if you're isolating biblical doctrine from what's going on at that time, and we're going to talk more about that in a second, then you're not getting it. You're not understanding it. You're deliberately, frankly, missing what the Bible is saying because it's not in context, right? And if you've ever been to Bible college, or for that matter, if you've ever been to Sunday school, you've heard teachers and ministers and pastors say the single most important piece of the puzzle when it comes to interpreting scripture is context, context, context. Context is king. Okay. Now, the last thing I'm going to say, like I said, for those of you that haven't heard my show before, is that the traditional nativity story is mythology. It is Christian mythology. It is a story that has taken on a life of its own, and it exists out there in the ether, whether it is connected to history or not. There it is, right? And most people swallow it hook, line, and sinker believing that, well, yeah, he had to have been born on December 25th. 8 bazillion people couldn't have been wrong. We've been studying, we've been celebrating it that way for 2,000 years, when the reality of it is, no, we haven't. Okay, no, we haven't been celebrating it that way for 2,000 years. The history of the holiday that we know as Christmas is actually way more volatile than most people recognize. And the modern holiday of Christmas really is a Western culture, Western European / American. It's really an American holiday. It's the United States of America has done more to promote the holiday that we call Christmas worldwide than anybody else in the past 150 years, really, is when Christmas has taken on the identity that it currently has. So the traditional Christmas story is Christian mythology. It's just, sorry guys, it's just not accurate. Now, as we get into what I want to talk about today, because what I want to do, like I said, is I want to paint a picture for you guys of what this really would have looked like. Okay. Now, I've described this in other videos. Let me do it in this one, other episodes, that what this is this is like having a very large, elaborate jigsaw puzzle. That's what historical research is like, okay? Historical research, doing really good historical research, is actually extremely difficult. It's very, very difficult. And number one, that's because the evidence that you have is almost always fragmentary, meaning you have a fraction of the evidence that you wish you had, okay? You might have 2%, 3%, 5% of all the evidence that's out there. You've got a tiny little fraction to work with. So using my illustration of a jigsaw puzzle, it's like having a very large, very elaborate jigsaw puzzle, 5,000 pieces, 10,000 pieces, and you've got 10%, right? You've got 10% of the pieces. So you have an idea what the picture is, right? You have an idea what the picture is, but you can't tell the detail at all, because you got this little cluster of pieces over here that fits together. You got another little cluster of pieces over here. You got a piece of border over there. Oh, I got a whole corner over there. That's pretty cool. But you've got a lot of isolated pieces that you can't connect to any other piece yet. Okay. And then you've got giant areas of open space that you have an idea what's there, but you don't know for sure. See? So the science and the art of historical research is to fill in these blanks, keyword here, reasonably. Reasonably. Not just with what's possible, but with what is reasonable. Okay? And we get that from a court of law in the United States. We've all watched way too much TV. We've seen courtroom dramas where they talk about the jury has to reach a conclusion that's beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay. Not beyond all doubt, not beyond a possible doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt, right? So, for example, in a criminal case, if you've got blood evidence and fingerprint evidence and DNA evidence and video evidence that all puts the accused at the scene, it is not reasonable to say, well, he was never there. I mean, he was just never there. Well, no, wait a second. We've got evidence, blood evidence, fingerprint evidence, DNA evidence, video evidence. We got tire impressions from his car that all put him at the scene of the crime. So the defense couldn't be, he simply wasn't there, right? So if a defense attorney were to ever question a witness and say, well, isn't it possible that someone else could have done it? The prosecutor is going to jump down their throat and say, wait, no, time out. This isn't about what's possible. This is about what's reasonable. Okay? Because is it possible in our puzzle that we're talking about here, right? Our giant 5,000 word puzzle, and the picture that we're looking at is the nativity of Jesus of Nazareth, right? Well, isn't it possible that there's a semi-trailer in that? No, it's actually not possible, because semi-trailers weren't invented yet. But you get my point from the illustration here. It's not about what's possible. It's about what's reasonable, okay? And that brings me to this point about historical research. This is extremely important, and it's extremely important with what we're going to look at tonight and probably next episode as well, okay? Which is this. The Bible is a foreign book, okay? It was not written in English, okay? Much to the surprise of the King James only crowd. It was not written in English. It was written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. 3 languages that we are aware of that it was written in those languages, and then it was quickly translated into additional languages as well. But we know that it was written in Hebrew, sections were written in Aramaic, and then sections were written in Greek, okay? So it's a foreign book, okay? It's not written in my native language, right? Now, that doesn't mean you can't translate it, because of course you can, right? But even when it's translated, it is possible that we are missing the nuances of the native language. So the best way to explore evidence that's in another language is to learn that language. Just that simple, okay? Now, also, the Bible is an ancient book, okay? It's minimum 2,000 years old, okay? Round numbers, right? Minimum 2,000 years old. So what you can't do, and I mean, this is the cardinal sin of biblical interpretation. It's the cardinal sin of historical interpretation, is trying to look backwards through a modern filter, okay? In other words, we think a certain word means a certain thing, or a certain idea looks like this, or something like that. Pardon me, got a cough. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, got to do this. That's odd. Okay, anyway. This is the cardinal sin of historical or biblical research, is to try to look backwards 2,000 years, and yet we have this filter that we're looking through, and therefore we're interpreting it according to our modern mindset. We have to do everything we can to remove the modern filter and try to discover the environment of the time, okay? It would be something akin to trying to, teleport yourself, time travel backwards. Sorry. Trying to time travel backwards, and then, for lack of a better way of saying it, you have to become the target audience, right? Because what you've got here is you've got a foreign author writing in a foreign language to a foreign audience. You've got an ancient author writing in an ancient language to an ancient audience. You've got a foreign ancient author writing in a foreign ancient language to a foreign ancient audience. We have to try to become that audience in order to properly interpret what the writer is trying to say. What message is he trying to get to us, the primary audience? See, because we're not, as 21st century Western culture, English speaking people, okay, no matter how much I believe the Bible, no matter how much I believe in Jesus, I'm not the primary audience. We're not the primary audience, ladies and gentlemen. We are an intended audience, okay, because of the sovereignty of God, but we are not the audience. We're just not, right? So the Bible may be written for us, but it is not written to us, okay? And this is very important in tonight's lesson. We're going to see this live and in living color in the information that we begin to talk about tonight, and then going into the next episode, okay? Now, I just presented that argument in light of the Bible itself, okay? Written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, okay? It is about the nation of Israel, okay, a Jewish nation. It's about the Jewish religion. It was written primarily by Jews for Jews. Couple exceptions here and there, but primarily by Jews for Jews, right? With then a secondary audience being the Gentiles, okay? But if I want to understand the message of the writer, I got to put on the same filter he has. That's really what it boils down to. I have to try to discover and then embrace the exact same filter that he's writing with, right? Now, if that's true for the Bible, then it is also true for the other cultures in and around biblical culture, because even in the Bible itself, we are introduced to Mesopotamian culture, Egyptian culture, Syrian culture, Greek culture, Roman culture. You've got all these neighboring cultures in and around Judea, in and around Israel, that influence the story. So not only is a Jewish perspective required, well, so is a Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Syrian, Greek, Roman framework required as well. Now, the area that I'm describing is known in academic circles as the Ancient Near East, or the ANE, the Ancient Near East. Now, the good news is that amongst the cultures that I just mentioned, there's more in common between them than there is different. So even if you compare ancient Rome to ancient Egypt to ancient Mesopotamia to ancient Israel, you're going to have more in common than you are going to have divergent. Okay. So the good news is the more we can learn about ancient Near Eastern culture in general, and then these specific cultures specifically, the better off we are going to be. Okay. That's going to help us learn what's going on here. Okay. So now, and this is particularly important, like I said, this is particularly important. This is especially critical when it comes to the use of certain words. And that's what, like I said, you're going to see it. You're going to know exactly what I'm talking about shortly, because we're going to discuss certain words where we have the modern equivalent in our vocabulary, right? We've got the modern equivalent in our vocabulary, but now we're going to look back at how the same word or the equivalent word was used 2,000 years ago, and it's not used the same way. And see, and that's where this would exactly be a case of, if we were to assume that it means what we think it means, we would interpret it entirely incorrectly. We would miss what's going on, because we would assume we know what the word means, when in reality, like I keep saying, we've got to backpedal about 2,000 years and go, okay, what did this word mean to this audience at this time? Okay, what did this word mean to them? Okay, because what we're going to look at is we're going to look at Roman religion. Okay, and some of you may be saying, oh, geez, Tim, what the heck does that have to do with, the birth of Jesus? And the answer is everything. Everything, because this is the context. This is the historical context into which Jesus of Nazareth was born. You had a Idumean king, right, Herod the Great, appointed by Rome, appointed by the Roman Senate, okay, in 40 BC, 41 BC, right in about there, to be the client king of the kingdom of Judea. So Roman culture has everything to do with what we're talking about. Everything. And if you're not interpreting the Bible in light of Roman culture, then you're missing it. So you got to interpret it in light of Jewish culture. You got to interpret it in light of ancient Near Eastern culture. You have to interpret it in light of Roman culture, or you're going to miss what it's talking about. Okay. Now, we don't have to go super in depth on what I'm about to discuss next, but you do need a little bit of flavor of what's going on here. So, because here you go, we throw around the term Roman Empire very liberally, right? Well, Rome was not always an empire. Rome started as a kingdom, and then it transformed into a republic, and then it transformed into an empire. So if you want, what we should be doing is we should be being careful to describe, well, that was during the kingdom of Rome, the Roman kingdom. That was during the Roman Republic, and that was during the Roman Empire, because the time frame in question, okay, the reign of Herod the Great, basically, is the changeover from republic to empire, okay, where we are focused right in on the transition from Rome ending being a republic into becoming an empire, okay. So if you're unaware of that, if you're unaware of that fact, then strap in, because that's what we're going to talk about, and it has dramatic effect on how we understand what's going on in the Bible. Okay, so now the founding of the city of Rome is traditionally understood to be in 753 BC. 753 BC or BCE, before Christ or before the Common Era. Okay, now there's several variations on the story about the founding of the city of Rome, right? So it all depends upon which source you go to, exactly which story you're going to hear, okay? But in general terms, the story is usually about twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, and about how their mother, I forget her name off the top of my head. That's how much I have memorized about Roman mythology myself. I don't remember her name off the top of my head. It's in my notes here. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Let's get her name here. Do 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 do. Oh, forget it. I'm not going to waste time scrolling through my notes. But twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, and their mother was supposedly impregnated by the god Mars. Okay, that's what's important here. Okay, is that they claim descent from the god Mars. There's also the Roman epic poem called the Aeneid, written by the Roman poet Virgil, that the Greek hero Aeneas is who founded Rome. That's mixed in as well. But like I said, you got a couple of different versions, so it depends upon which which resource you check to determine which version of the story you're going to get. But it's traditionally reckoned as 753 BC. Okay. Now, this has very strong bearing on our story, because if it was founded in 753 BC, then that means the era right around when Jesus was born. See, because Jesus was born in September of 3 BC. So that's 750 years since the founding of Rome. And part of what we're going to talk about tonight is significant events in the history of the Roman Empire. Significant events in the history of the Roman Empire were considered religious occasions, and therefore they were celebrated as religious occasions. They were commemorated and celebrated and recorded and heralded as religious occasions. So the 750th anniversary of the founding of Rome would have been a big deal. Okay, so right there, that's why we are able to say, "Ooh, wow, you got my attention here," right? Okay, now also the mythology of the founding of Rome, right, was a critical component of Roman culture. So that means it is part of the Roman mindset. So just like if you're trying to understand what's going on in Judea, you need to understand the mind of a Judean. If you want to understand what's going on in Rome, you need to understand what's going on in the mind of a Roman. Okay. But Judea is a client kingdom of Rome. So you have some people Herod being one of them, that are embracing Roman ideas. Now, maybe not 100%, but he's embracing certain Roman ideas. He sent his children to be educated in the imperial court. I mean, they knew Caesar Augustus, personal friends. I mean, Herod was a personal friend of Augustus, and then Herod's sons were personal friends of Augustus. So do you think that the Roman mindset had an effect on the critical people of this time, Herod and his sons, who are, supposed to be king after he dies, right? Because, Herod is going to die right in conjunction with the birth of Christ, and he was obsessed with which one of his sons would succeed him. Okay, so founding of Rome, 753 BC. That means the 750th anniversary is right in this ballpark. Okay, there are other significant events that are also right in this ballpark, but the whole mindset of the mythology of the founding of Rome would have been active in people's minds. They would have been aware of it. Now, a Jew may not have been critically aware of the way Romans think, but a general knowledge, that's actually possible, especially considering that Rome was the empire that dominated Judea at that time, and Herod was causing Roman culture to invade the nation of Israel. Okay, so that means they've got Roman culture in their face. So how can you avoid knowing at least a little bit about what's going on? Okay, so that's just a little bit about the founding of, and that's a little bit, I mean, that's just a squeak little, scratch of the surface, talking about the founding of the Roman kingdom of Rome. Okay, pardon me, in 753 BC. Now, the traditional date of the founding of the Roman Republic is 509 BC or BCE. And the whole idea of Rome becoming a republic was to get away from and then prevent a king, a monarch. In other words, to prevent a single person or a single group from holding too much power. That was the whole idea of them adopting a republican form of government. So here's one of our words, okay, republic or republican. Don't you dare try to use the American Republican Party as some kind of equivalent, okay? Because they don't mean the same thing at all. And don't try to say, well, Republicans today were like, okay, there's a connection in what the word means. There's a similarity in what the word means and how the word used, but there's a lot of difference, okay? Because republic in this context means a representative form of government, a representative form of government. So they had a Senate where the senators represented the people. And then, in addition, the way under the Roman Republic, they wouldn't have a single leader. They would have two leaders. The office was called the consul, 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 right? And they would have two of them that were annually elected by the Senate. So there would be two consuls, right? Not one, two. And the whole point was that if you've got two men who are in charge, then you're going to prevent the possibility of one person having too much power. Okay. But what happened so that was 509 BC is the traditional date of the origin of the Roman Republic. Okay. But then during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, Rome expanded territorially and economically very significantly. And because it expanded territorially and economically so quickly, it was actually rather unstable. It made it very difficult to keep everything under control, and it made it very easy for powerful individuals to gain more power by gaining territory and money and things like that. And then when you get right aroundish the turn from the second century to the first century BC, there were some reforms in the military, in the Roman military, that made it very easy for Roman generals to become very powerful because they were at the head of an army, and then they could use that army to gain territory and wealth. So it was very, very easy for a military general to become extraordinarily powerful, and that's exactly what we're going to see. We're going to see all these military men that became extremely powerful. So at the beginning of the first century BC, you had one of the first significant civil wars in Roman history. And then by the time you get to the middle of the first century BC, you've got another series of civil wars that occur between these really powerful military men, is really what it boils down to. Now, as a result of these civil wars, the government tried to adapt. Okay. This led to certain adaptations to try to hold the republic together, to avoid dictatorship, to avoid monarchy, to avoid a king, and hold on to some semblance of shared authority. Okay. So the first attempt at this was when Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar and Marcus Crassus formed what was called the First Triumvirate. Okay. And the First Triumvirate lasted from 59 BC to 53 BC. These were three of the most powerful men in the Roman Empire. And what they did is they reached an agreement that the idea was it would keep each other out of each other's hair, was really kind of the idea. But that meant that Pompey got this part of the empire, Caesar got this part of the empire, Crassus got this part of the empire. But what happened was is each man went off to their part of the empire and then continued to gain more territory and gain more wealth and therefore become more powerful. So while on one hand it kind of kept them out of each other's hair, on the other hand, it didn't really work. It just fueled the fire of leading to a monarchy or a dictatorship of a single individual being in power, right? So the first triumvirate eventually fell apart because there was some interfamilial marriages there, and certain people died and things like that. And then Crassus got defeated. He tried to go enrich himself in Parthia, invaded Parthia, and got killed. Okay, so Crassus is dead, and Pompey's wife dies, and the first triumvirate falls apart. Okay, well, then this results in a civil war between Pompey and Caesar that Caesar wins. Okay, and then as a result of him of winning this war, he eventually, a few years later, after defeating Pompey, a few years later, he's declared dictator for life by the Senate. Okay. But here's the exact point. That's what the Republicans are trying to avoid. They want to keep Rome as a republic. They don't want a monarch. They don't want a king. They don't want a dictator. Okay. So this is why he's assassinated, is because the old school Republicans don't want to let go of the Republican form of government and head back to either a kingdom or an empire. That's not what they want. So that's why they assassinate Julius Caesar. So then once Caesar is out of the picture, then you get what's called the second triumvirate. Okay. And the second triumvirate was Gaius Octavius, which is Caesar's great nephew by blood, but adopted son by law. So you've got Octavius, or Octavian, okay, is one of the members of the second triumvirate. And then you've got Marcus Antonius, who is known as Mark Antony in English because of William Shakespeare. Okay. And then you've got Marcus Lepidus was the third member, another powerful Roman. the third member of the second triumvirate. Okay. But basically the same thing happens. It's a political agreement to keep each other out of each other's hair. You go control this part of the empire. You get this. See out there. See there. I slipped. You go control this part of the republic. I'll go control this part of the republic. The other guy will go control that part of the republic. But all that's going to happen is that we're going to gain more territory. We're going to gain more wealth. And eventually we've got to fight each other because we want to be in charge, right? Because make no mistake, Julius Caesar wanted to be a monarch. He desired it. He did not try to keep the Roman Republic a republic. Now, he kept the veneer, okay? He wanted it to look like it was a republic, but he was a dictator, right? He was a dictator. And then, and we're going to talk about this extensively, his great nephew, right? But his adopted son, Octavian, he wanted to be dictator as well. Make no mistake about that. That was his goal, was to be dictator. And once again, he may have kept the look of a republic. As a matter of fact, he was much better at it than his uncle. All right. Julius Caesar let his self-aggrandizement get the better of him. Okay. It was his self-aggrandizement that got him assassinated. Okay. His nephew / legally adopted son, Octavian, okay, he did a much better job at not looking like he wanted to be dictator. Okay. But the whole point is you start out with the kingdom of Rome, then you get the Roman Republic, and we are in the period of time, the second half of the first century before Christ, when Rome is transforming from a republic into an empire. Okay? So now the second triumvirate falls apart because specifically Marcus Antonius and Octavian, they go head to head. Okay. They both want to be in charge. They both want power. Actually, Mark Antony, he wants to go party in Egypt with Cleopatra. He probably would not have been upset if they would have just agreed to split the empire. And then he would have been in charge of the Roman East and leave the West to Augustus, or to Octavian, right? Who is Augustus, by the way. I'll explain that in a second, right? But these two couldn't leave each other alone. So eventually they had to fight another civil war, and Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. So with the second triumvirate falling apart and then Octavian defeating Antony, right? It's actually Antony, not Anthony. Antony, because his name is Antonius. In Latin, it's Marcus Antonius. So in English, it would be Mark Antony, not Anthony. Antony, right? Say that 5 times fast, right? So Octavian defeats Antony at Actium in 31 BC. That leaves Octavian the sole ruler of Rome. That's it. Okay. 4 years later, the Senate bestowed upon him the title of Augustus. Okay. So that's where that comes into the picture. If you're not familiar with the nomenclature, we're going to talk about it in more detail. But here's the quick version, right? Octavian, his name was Gaius Octavius, right? Or Octavian. Gaius Octavian, that's his name, right? Julius Caesar, like I said, was his great uncle. But Julius Caesar declared him his adopted son in his will. Okay, so when Julius Caesar died, Octavian took his adopted father's name. So Octavian became Octavian Caesar. Okay, So you got Julius Caesar, and then his adopted son took his name and became Octavian Caesar. Okay. And then after the Battle of Actium, 4 years later, when the Senate declares him Augustus, then he becomes known as Augustus Caesar. So they're all the same guy, right? Gaius Octavian Augustus Caesar are all the same guy. And maybe not during this episode, or maybe we will. We're going to get into Roman naming conventions because they matter. They matter. They would have mattered to a Roman. So, in that environment, in that culture, in that context of that day and time, it would matter what someone's name was and what it meant. That was communicating things to you based upon what the person's name meant, because Augustus means something. Okay. So maybe I'm going to keep going through my notes here, and we will see how far we get, whether I start explaining what that name means or not. Okay. So we've gone through a quick overview here, very, very quick overview of the Kingdom of Rome, and then the Republic of Rome, and now the Empire of Rome, and that the time frame that we're looking at, the second half of the 1st century BCE, is the time frame when the Roman Republic is transforming into an empire. There's lots of wars, lots of civil wars between these very powerful Roman generals and their armies over who will be in power. And then you have, these old school Romans trying to hold on to the Republic, but over time, more and more and more and more, they're either getting defeated in battle, or they're getting killed, or their wealth and their land are being confiscated, frankly. Okay, because that happened very frequently to pay for these wars, is that these powerful men would just go in and confiscate their enemy's land. They would just go in and take it, right? So more and more and more and more, they're either being defeated in battle, or they're having their land confiscated, or they're just being murdered, or they're learning that they've just straight up got to go along. They don't have any choice, because if they don't go along, then they're going to lose their land or lose their life. And then that's just really all there is to it. Okay. So we're starting to run down on time, but let's go there. Let's take a minute and we'll wrap up with this. I want to introduce to you the concepts behind Roman naming conventions, how their names worked, because the names can be very confusing. Because number one, we don't speak Latin. I mean, I took 2 quarters of Latin in college. I am not a Latin scholar by any stretch of the imagination. I couldn't tell a Latin verb from a Latin noun, without looking it up. I can't do it, right? I can fumble my way through pronouncing it reasonably well, but I'm not a Latin scholar, not even remotely, right? So, but I'm going to give a lot of these words in their Latin form, because when you see them in their Latin form, you're going to see their root. You're going to see their root word. So therefore, you're going to be able to see, oh, that's where we get the word this, right? Right. So like, for example, we're not going to get there tonight. We're going to talk about the Latin word religio. Well, that's where we get the word religion. Okay. But the word religion in Latin to an ancient Roman means something rather different than what the word religion means to us today. See, so this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, is that if you're not investigating historical context, you're missing it. Okay, because you've got to understand, what would it have meant to those people at that time? Not what does it mean to me today? What does it mean to them back then? Therefore, what does it mean to me today? But I got to understand what it would have meant to them first. So in Roman naming conventions, they used this concept called the tria nomina. Okay, tria, Tria, nomina, Nomina, tria nomina, and that simply means three names. Tria, trio, three, right? Nomina, name, right? Tria nomina means three names, right? And this doesn't matter, but here you go. The three names are called: number one, the praenomen. Okay, that would be the first name. Number two, the nomen, or it was also known as the nomen gentilicium. Okay. Nomen gentilicium. That's the middle name, air quotes for those that can't see me on camera, right? And then the third one was called the cognomen, the third name, right? So you had three names: one, two, three. Okay. So the first name was just like our first name. Okay. It was your personal name. So my name is Tim. Okay. There it is. That's my first name. Your name might be Bob or Sue or John or Laura or whatever, right? Picking names out of a hat here. Okay. But then the second name in Roman naming conventions, that would have been the family name. Okay. See, for us, the second name is usually what we call our middle name, and then the last name is the family name, right? My family name is Keyes or Keys, right? Keyes, Keyes or Keys. I answer to both because both pronunciations are correct in their appropriate context, okay? But you would call me Tim Keyes or Tim Keys, and you'd be right because my first name is my name, and then my second name is my family name. Okay. Now, in the Roman naming conventions, they had this third name called the cognomen. And the third name started out as something like a nickname. Okay. That's kind of how the convention got started. But then over time, it became hereditary along with the family name. So the third name was either a nickname or a hereditary designation. And oftentimes it was used to designate a particular branch of the family or clan. So even though the second name was the family name, the third name might be a designation about a certain branch of the family. Okay, so let's give you a couple of examples, right? So let's start with the obvious one, which is Julius Caesar. See, now we know him as Julius Caesar, but ironically, Julius is his family name, not his first name. His first name, his praenomen, was Gaius. His nomen was Julius, and then his cognomen was Caesar. Gaius Julius Caesar. His family was the Julii, so that's the plural, Julii. So Gaius Julius Caesar. Praenomen, nomen, cognomen, right? Okay. So going back to Octavian for a minute, his first name was actually also Gaius, Gaius Octavian. See? And then when he became Julius Caesar's adopted son, he added the cognomen Gaius Octavius Caesar. Okay. Then, just for clarification, over the centuries, Caesar has now taken on a meaning of its own. It started as a name, but then it changed and now it's a title because, see, everybody after Octavian, all the Roman emperors after Octavian took the title Caesar, right? So they treated it as this weird blend of a name and a title. And then over time, it became a title, right? And it's a title that basically means emperor, okay, or king or dictator or something like that. In our modern world, the German word Kaiser and the Russian word Tsar are derivations of Caesar, okay? They're the same word, just translated into a different language, okay? But you've got the tria nomina, right? Three names: first name, family name, and then the cognomen, this additional distinction, right? So just as another example, consider Pompey, right? The Roman general Pompey. Well, Pompey is his family name. It's the middle name, right? His first name was Gnaeus, right? And then he was known as Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. See, so Magnus in this case is more of that nickname because Magnus means big or large or great. So he was known as Pompey the Great. Okay, right. Now we're running out of time, so we'll squeeze in one last little detail and then we will wrap up for the night, which is that for the most part, it was the tria nomina. There were 3 names, right? Occasionally, there would be a 4th name thrown in called the agnomen. And the agnomen was usually based on something that happened in the person's life or something like that that would designate them a certain way. So, as a matter of fact, there was a Roman general, okay, whose name was Publius Cornelius Scipio. And Scipio won, he's the Roman general that defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, right? Well, Zama is in Africa, in North Africa. So Scipio became known as Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus because of that victory in Africa. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have run out of time, so I do need to wrap it up right there. I want to thank you for joining me on the Truth Be Told Radio Network, where you can hear me every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join me again next week, where we're going to continue where we left off, talking about Roman Imperial theology. God save the King.